All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Higher Business Series. I'm Kylee Ingram, the CEO and co-founder of Wizer, a decision intelligence platform. Today, we have a really great interview with James Healy. He's a consultant, keynote speaker, and author, blending expertise from a range of disciplines, including anthropology, behavioral economics, and neuroscience. James previously founded and led Deloitte's Global Behaviour First offering, and he is the founder of the Behaviour Boutique. Now, James has written the book, BS at Work, love it, and it gets to the core of many things that are ridiculous about the corporate world, but seen as best practice. In this book, James traces how modern organisations were shaped by a cast of wildly unexpected characters, including Dennis Hopper's wife, the creator of Wonder Woman, and so many more. The point this book keeps coming back to is most workplaces were not designed for humans as we are, the social, emotional, and tribal people. They were designed for an imaginary, rational calculator that does not exist. So thank you for those joining us live today. Please introduce yourselves in the chat and ask us anything you'd like James to answer. And James, thank you for joining me and for writing this book. It was so fun, and it is jam-packed with case studies, research, anecdotes. And the book left me with the feeling, and I think other readers with the feeling, that you had to write this. Like, these stories had to come out. There are so many stories in there. It's incredible.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Kylee, for having me. I think your assessment is fair. I did have to write the book, and I had been thinking about writing it for some time. As I talk about in the introduction to the book, it all crystallized one afternoon in April, and it was the day before Easter. It was the day before the long weekend, and I was taking the following week off. And for once in my career, I was not running like a mad person, desperately trying to get everything done before I went off on holiday. I had everything under control, and I was just about to leave the office early. Went out to me that there was a deadline that day for a mandatory e-learning. And I'm sure most of the listeners will be familiar with these wonderful, wonderful things. If you've ever worked in a big corporate or indeed a small organization, you're probably familiar with mandatory e-learnings. Beautifully sculpted, inane, pointless, but perfectly designed so that you can't skip to the end. You can't look away. You have to spend 40 minutes clicking through, and you then at the end have to do the multiple choice test. Now, this was just like all of those e-learnings, but the subject of this e-learning, and you couldn't make this up, the subject of this e-learning was how to do e-learnings. And the backstory to it, I won't be too coy. You've already mentioned where I was working at the time. This could, to be honest, have been any of my employers over the years. It could have been any of my clients. But the backstory to this is that one of Deloitte's competitors in the US had got a big fine from the regulators because it had been found that people were cheating earnings. And so the response to this, all of the big accounting and consulting firms, the response to learning that nobody takes e-learning seriously was to give everyone a learning about how they should take e-learnings seriously.
And so it was a final head explosion that you need.
This whole scenario prompted me. Correct. It prompted me to ask the question that I've asked so many times throughout my career about so many different things I've encountered in the workplace. Does anybody actually think this is going to work? And I still don't know which of the two possible answers to that question is more depressing. Yes, somebody intelligent, senior, well-paid, in a position of authority actually thinks this nonsense is going to work. Or the alternative, which is, no, everybody knows this isn't going to work, but they're making us do it anyway.
Yes.
And that was the trigger for the book.
Well, I love it. And so we've got Melanie here. She's saying, hey, great to be here. We've got Kush. Hi, Kush. Hi, Melanie. Melanie's
Hey,
like
Kush.
days of learning doom scrolling. So true. And we've also got Amanda. Thanks for joining us. So I wanted to ask you, because we'd need hours to break down. We need series to break down all the stories in this book. And so if we had to pick one, your favorite out of all the research that you did, where do we start? What's the wildest? Which one's your favorite?
So my favorite is DISC, the personality profiling tool, which is used by many large organizations, is the subject of many best-selling books, and like so much of this stuff is utterly baseless. The backstory for DISC is it was invented by a gentleman called William Moulton Marsden in the US in the 1940s. Now, William Moulton Marsden is better known for something else that he invented: the Wonder Woman comic book character. And Wonder Woman is a composite of William Marsden's two wives, with whom he apparently lived happily in a three-way relationship, which each to their own, don't judge other people's lifestyles. But that was quite unusual in 1940s America. And Marsden and his two wives wrote a book called The Emotions of Normal People, which, if you read it, and I don't recommend you do because it's pretty turgid, but if you at least skim read it, you will quickly learn that it is a sort of pseudo-psychological justification for their alternative lifestyle and for some of the things that they got up to in the bedroom. And the D in DISC originally stood for dominant, and the S originally stood for submissive, which I think gives you something of an insight into where that book was going. This is a tool which is used by some of the largest organizations in the world for team building, for career development. Apparently, it is used in hiring and promotion decisions in some organizations. Really? Can we not do any better than this?
I mean, there's so many jokes to be made after that story about what it puts in new perspective into team building, I guess, but that's inappropriate. And what about, off the back of that, because you've got a couple of chapters on the personality tests and calling them corporate horoscopes. What about Myers-Briggs too? Because what are these things are worth what, hundreds of millions of dollars a year in revenue, aren't they? Like, they're big industries. So, and they are deciding who gets a job, which is terrifying.
Myers-Briggs is similar. So, invented in the US in the 1920s. It began when a young woman, and I always get the names the wrong way around, the Briggs family, essentially.
Was Catherine the
young
mother?
Lady comes home from college for the holidays, brings a surprise with her, and the surprise is her new fiance. And her mother is horrified, not least because she really dislikes the fiance, because he seems to be totally different to the daughter and to the rest of the family. So the mother, who is well qualified for this because she is an erotic novelist, you couldn't make this stuff up, goes down a rabbit hole of personality types, and she comes up with her sort of typography of personality. She then encounters the work of Carl Gustav Jung, who is obviously very famous but now utterly discredited psychologist from the turn of the 20th century. And this becomes Myers-Briggs. And it's named Myers-Briggs because their family were the Myers, and the fiance's surname was Briggs. That's that's where this comes from.
At least he got a showing in the end. He got, part credited in the end.
I know, very, very kind. But it's utterly baseless. If you do the test twice within 5 weeks, there is a more than 50% chance that you get a different result. And all joking aside, I think that speaks to the main problem with these things. They're just nonsense. If you did a medical test that half the time gave you a totally different result, you wouldn't be in a very good place.
No,
the test, yeah. I mean, the categories sound something credible, intuitive, sensing, but when you stop to think about it, there's really no clear boundary between them. They're just different ways of saying similar things. So the boundaries between all of the categories aren't clear. The difference between the categories aren't clear. Crucially, none of these categories are negative. No one is going to read their Myers-Briggs or indeed their DISC result and think, oh God, I sound like a bit of an asshole. Any accurate personality test, let's be honest, has to at least offer the possibility that some people would fail the arsehole test. But when you read these things, it's like horoscopes. They are somewhat vague. They are positively framed. You want to be that person. Oh, okay, yeah, that sounds, yeah, I do have great attention to detail. And so this is why people get sucked into believing these things, because it feels nice. And it gives you a way of thinking about the world. Here are some categories that we can put people into.
It sounds like there's an opportunity for you to create an asshole test or a narcissist test that's missing out in the world, perhaps.
I mean, the only personality test that is really widely accepted, and it is widely accepted among academic psychologists, but not universally so, is the Big Five. So otherwise known as Ocean. That is the only personality test which is somewhat credible. And I think the sort of the more serious point, which I do make in the book, is that we tend to fixate on personality. We tend to imagine that we all have this fixed set of traits and that our behavior is driven by our innate personality, by our innate sort of nature. The reality, and there's plenty of examples of this through history, the more disturbing reality is that our behavior is shaped a lot more by environment than we like to imagine. And so in an organizational context, it's easy to attribute people's behavior to their personality. And you think in terms of sort of misconduct, so you think about big corporate scandals, the line that is always trotted out by whichever organization it is, whether it's Volkswagen faking the emissions targets or Boeing, building planes that are unsafe, these things are always attributed to a few bad apples. We just had some bad people.
Yeah.
The reality is, you put people in the right set of circumstances. Yes, there is some level of innate sort of tendency in particular directions, but you put people in the right circumstances, you can get people to do anything. And some of the darker episodes in human history illustrate this. It's not that hard, if you know what you're doing, to create a set of circumstances where people will do utterly terrible things. But we fixate on innate tendency, we fixate on fixed personality, and it kind of gets us off the hook as leaders in organizations for the environment that we have created.
Yeah, that's fascinating. is fascinating. We've got a couple of, we have Dr. Richard Cladden. He's wary that the idea of Jung and Marsden have been discredited. Their work has been misunderstood and misappropriated, but still sees a lot of value.
I think, look, I think Marsden's whole theory, such as it was, has been discredited. It's based on the existence of psychons, a sort of strange metaphysical. It's very of the 19th century. I don't think anyone would seriously try and defend that. I think Marsden also is responsible for the lie detector test, which is used by, still used by the FBI. Again, at best, it's very controversial. There's, despite what you see on TV, there's not much evidence at all that it works, that it's accurate, that it's consistent. I think DISC, I mean, I'm slightly speechless that anyone would try and defend DISC, given the origin story that I just outlined. There's no scientific evidence for it at all. I've not come across a single paper anywhere by anyone even attempting to assess DISC, simply because it's not even scientific. So it's not even really subject to scientific analysis. Jung, I think, look, Jung is one of those thinkers, a bit like Marx, who was, and indeed like Freud, with whom he was originally very close and then fell out. They wrote so much, you can find something in their writings which still has validity. I think, again, Jung is very much of the 19th century, sort of pre-scientific psychology. There is a lot about archetypes. There is a lot about, I think, what most serious thinkers nowadays would categorize as pretty woo-woo. So I think Jung is interesting. I'm not sure as a basis for anything practical in the real world, Jung is really where it's at.
Well, Kush, I know Kush has read your book, as another ex-Deloitte person, and she's talking about, the story behind change management in your book, the Kluber-Ross working mind, denial, anger, bargain, depression, and acceptance.
So if you do a Google search, and I did this when I was writing the book, and obviously, the Google algorithm is a law unto itself, and it depends on what you've looked for previously. But at one stage, I searched for the change curve, and anyone who's worked in organizational change or in organizations for a long time will have encountered the change curve. I did a search for it and found 4 billion Google results. The change curve, either explicitly or implicitly, underpins most of change management. The change curve is the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief rebadged. Now, as I talk about in the book, the 5 stages of grief is arguably the single best known psychological concept in history. There is a Friends episode on it. There is a Simpsons episode on it. Everybody has heard of the 5 stages of grief. Everybody has probably referred to the 5 stages of grief, often in a joking way, a sports result or an election result or some outcome at work. The 5 stages of grief, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, was based on her work interviewing people who had received a terminal diagnosis, usually a terminal cancer diagnosis. And her methodology, such as it was just to categorize arbitrarily the way that people responded to that diagnosis into these 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance. DABDA is the acronym. It was completely debunked in its own field. So very quickly, even while Kubler-Ross was still alive, it was totally debunked. Kubler-Ross is on record as saying they're not stages. Not everybody goes through all of them. Not everybody goes through any of them. And people don't go through them in that order. So even in its own original context of response to a terminal diagnosis, Kubler-Ross had to admit it's just basically some categories of feelings that some people might have. So the whole curve thing is a nonsense. All of this is before you make the gigantic logical leap of assuming that the way people respond to being told they've got weeks left to live is the same way that people will respond to an upgrade to the accounting system at work or the implementation of a new CRM. It's bonkers. It's batshit. But yet it underpins this whole gigantic industry. And it doesn't stand up to any scrutiny.
It's so easy to laugh at all these stories you say, but like, as I think, the more you listen to what you're saying, and as Charlene says here, it does let people off the hook, and it distances them sometimes from real accountability. Like, it's not just ridiculous because there's no evidence behind these things, but it's building in behavior that is not going to help your company in the long run, is it?
Correct. And I think one of the, to get away from the sort of the funny backstories and the debunking of corporate nonsense, which is the first part of the book, in the more serious parts of the book, which there are many, and there is a serious point to it. One of the, I would say, probably most troubling or most controversial things in the book, and I didn't write it to be controversial, but I suspect that one of the things people might find most controversial is I question the idea that people are doing things for the benefit of the organization. That is one of the great sort of shared myths that we all sign up to. And again, it doesn't stand up to much scrutiny if you poke it a bit. Organizations are things that we as humans have created, and they are a stage on which we play out human nature. The idea that we are all, as soon as we walk through the doors of work, able to put aside our own interests, our own motivations, our own aspirations, our own biases, and do everything purely in service of the greater good, shareholder returns, is nonsense. One of the reasons that so many of these things persist is because people aren't making decisions that are impartially, objectively in the interests of the organization. They're making decisions based on what's best for their career. They're making decisions based on what makes them look good or helps them in their political game versus whoever. And this is not some big conspiracy theory. This is not sort of suggesting that the world is run by terrible people who are, moving the pawns around. It's just that human nature is, we are social, we are emotional, we are tribal, we are storytelling animals. And so often organizational decisions are based not on what is actually going to work. They're based on what's the safest decision. What will I not get fired for? What I will not get fired for is doing the same thing that everyone else does. I talk in the book about the Overton Window, which is this concept from political science, that there is essentially a sort of a relatively small set of policy ideas that a politician can stand up and talk about without blowing up their whole career. And the Overton window shifts over time. Now, let's put aside what's going on in the US at the moment. We have a leader of the free world who has blown the Overton window wide open. But if you think about, the way that things have shifted in Australia, if a politician here had stood up in the 1960s and suggested gay marriage or a vote on a voice for Aboriginal people, they would have blown up their career. The Overton window shifted over the last 30, 40 years to the point where, one of those things became policy, another one was put to a referendum. If you think about the Overton window in an organizational context, there is a relatively small set of things that you can recommend for an organizational problem. If you're a CEO and your job is essentially share price up, well, you can do a merge. You can do the whole thing. You can implement some new technology. You can roll out a new product. There's not that much more than those things that you can do. If you've got a problem, people aren't doing the thing that we want them to do, well, you can roll out an e-learning. You can do some leadership development. You can write a policy. You can put some posters on the wall. Again, I'm exaggerating slightly for effect, but it's not a very long list of accepted things. And if you go outside of that window of accepted things, you're taking a big risk. No one ever got fired for suggesting an e-learning or a new policy. Do they work? It doesn't matter.
Is part of the problem too, like, people are doing things for themselves, for what they need. But then the company apparently is there to make return for shareholders. Like, there's all these, like, should that be, what they're trying, like, there's all these different competing ideas about what a company exists for. And the people in that company, what they're doing. Like, they're not even making their colleagues' lives better potentially by doing this. Like, if they weren't going to think about the company and they thought about the people, or they thought about whatever, like, there could be a structure as to what they're coming at, as to what's most important, like a hierarchy or something.
I think
I think we may have a little glitch with James at the moment. But those of you that, I'm not sure, Kush or somebody that's there, if you can tell me whether or not you're seeing the glitch as well. Oh, here we are.
Can you hear me?
I know. Yeah, I just, I think you fell out, and then we had a second one of you come in. So you're back. Sorry, everybody, about that. Wouldn't be this world. James, can you hear us? Yes, this is true. It's the highest paid person's opinion, the HIPPOs of the world. Hey, Kush, definitely. So one of the things that why James and I, until James realized, I can hear myself on James's computer, so I will stop torturing you all with me talking. James, you're back.
Sorry, I am back. I don't know what happened. Blame technology. I think I was saying it's complicated, right? Every organization is a bunch of people. The core message of the book, if people take nothing else away from this conversation, and indeed from the book, the core message is humans are complicated. The world is complicated. Both of those things are far more complex than we like to imagine. And so I think trying to categorize people's motivations or the causes of people's behavior in an organization is fraught with difficulty. People are motivated by lots and lots of different things, and they change moment to moment. So there will be some people, usually those with MBAs, by the way, who try and operate in the interests of shareholder value more often than not. There'll be people who are operating in the interests of their colleagues. And it will change from moment to moment. And there are things that leaders can do to try and to pull people more in the same direction. But we're very naive if we imagine that even we ourselves are always acting in the best interests of what is essentially a fictitious concept. We are going to find very few people who will honestly blow up their own career in the interest of doing the right thing or doing the thing that's best for the organization. And that's not a criticism of people, it's just a reality.
Yeah. And if you what do you think is that you keep seeing today? What's the worst assumption that, it's leadership or, people in management positions are making today that they should stop immediately? Is there any, anything in that realm?
Well, I would say that the sort of the original sin here, the root cause of many of the other mistakes, is the idea that this is simple. The idea that there is a silver bullet, that whatever complex problem we have in our large organization, it will be solved by implementing the latest expensive piece of software. The inherent contradictions and gray areas will be resolved by this reorg. Sure, we've done 10 different restructures in the past that didn't solve these problems, but this one will be different. This will be the reorg to end them all. There needs to be just more humility that humans are complicated, organizations are complicated, the world is complicated. Anyone who tells you, I have the solution to your problem, is lying, either to you or to themselves.
Yeah. But do you think that's also why leaders jump onto this stuff, like onto these things, or do you think it is, it is just moving accountability across? Why are they going and doing all these things that, because they're safe, I guess, to some point what you were saying in the book?
Well, I think we dislike uncertainty, and without going too deep on the neuroscience, it's an increasing consensus that the brain is a predictive organ, that rather than being a sort of passive processor of information from the outside world, the brain is constantly predicting and validating its predictions against the outside world. We dislike uncertainty, and psychologically we dislike uncertainty, right? Like you'll meet very few people who can honestly say, oh, I love uncertainty. I love not knowing if I'm going to have a job next week, or if we're going to win that big piece of work, or whatever it is. And so there is something deeply seductive about certainty. You are feeling uncertain. Here is the thing that I have that I can sell you that will give you some certainty, that will make you feel comfortable, will reduce your discomfort. It's a natural human tendency. It's understandable that that's the way leaders react. This is not to vilify leaders. It's more to humanize them and to, I guess, maybe take them a bit off the pedestal. One of the things I say in the book, and I say it specifically about change management, but it's more broadly applicable, If we had more humility about the ineffectiveness of change management and the difficulty of successfully making major changes in large organizations, if we were all just a bit more honest that this is really hard, and having one contractor sending some emails and putting up some posters may not be sufficient to get us over the line, well, we might be a little more reticent about attempting gigantic transformations. If we acknowledge that merging large organizations together is fraught with difficulty and almost never succeeds, then we might do less of it.
And would that be a good or a bad thing?
Well, it'd be a bad thing if you're an M&A banker, if you're an employee, or indeed a shareholder, a long-term shareholder. I think there's a lot of evidence that it might be better.
And now you've gone into, you're out of the big arena, working for the big guy, and you're doing your own stuff with the Behaviour Boutique. What are you, what's fulfilling you now? What kind of work are you loving doing and seeing take effect?
My aim, and it's both a very grandiose aim, which is deeply ironic, having just talked about humility, but it's also quite a modest aim, I guess, is can we get organizations, can we get leaders to think about humans as humans? And so that when we're doing things, whether it's trying to change the culture, trying to implement new technology, or as every organization is now doing, and I'm doing work in this space, in full disclosure, trying to adopt AI, can we do that in a more human way? Can we do that in a way that recognizes humans as we are, rather than the strange caricature that we all sign up to believing populates our organizations?
But wouldn't most leaders think they do know that they've got humans, or what, is that, or is that that's the initial pushback? They're not seeing what they're doing wrong.
Correct. And it's the paradox of any kind of advisory business, whether you're a doctor or a management consultant. Generally, the people who most need your help are the least likely to know that they need your help, are the least likely to seek it out or accept it.
Yes, well, we know that very well at Wizer. Those that need us most want us least, which is a fun challenge in itself.
Again, it's human nature. We are inherently overconfident. We think we experience reality as it is, rather than a deeply subjective slice of reality. We think we understand things far better than we do. And we think that we can control and influence them far more than we can.
And if you could give leaders a BS filter for the next rollout they're going to do, what would that be? How can they assess themselves to say this is just an absolute waste of time, or whatever? How not get trapped in this treadmill of rubbish that you're feeding your employees?
Ask that same question that prompted me to write the book. Does anybody actually think this is going to work? And the follow-on question from that is, well, if they do, why? Why do people think Myers-Briggs is going to work? Is it because of something on the website of the people selling you the tool? Is it because you did it at your previous place and people enjoyed it?
Yeah.
What is the actual problem that we're trying to solve? Because often these accepted ways of doing things don't solve the underlying problem, but they solve a different problem. They allow us to Well, they allow us to say that we're doing something,
Yeah.
and
But
they
but
allow us
sometimes
to
it must not
report
be much more
progress.
than it must not be much more than just saying we're doing something in a lot of the instances you give in your book.
Correct. But and this, I guess, would be the other piece of advice, apart from asking sort of pseudo philosophical questions, which I know executives are not generally want to do. Think about how you're measuring success. And usually not always, but usually in organizations, we are measuring the wrong things. So we are, in the case of the e-learnings, where we started this conversation, where the book starts, well, one of the reasons that organizations love e-learnings is because they provide data. And the data they provide is two things. One, completion. So we can say confidently, because it's all tracked, we can confidently say that 97% of our employees have done the e-learning. That, by the way, we told them they'll get fired if they don't do. But 97% of them have done it. And what's more, of the 97% that have done it, 98.7% have got more than 95% in the multiple choice quiz at the end. This demonstrates conclusively that everyone has understood it and everyone will act on it. Of course, it demonstrates no such thing. It demonstrates that we have created a really easy test so that everyone can pass it, so that we can then report these positive statistics. Often, this hasn't happened consciously. It's not a conspiracy. It's not that people have sat around and sort of agreed to all this necessarily. It's just the dumb thing. It's harder and perhaps, dare I say, more dangerous to measure whether or not this is actually working.
Yeah.
Measure over time, have the instances of the thing that we didn't want people to do, have they gone down? Is there any correlation at all between whether or not people doing the e-learning stops them doing the thing that we don't want them to do?
Yeah, it's I guess it's just a circle of absurdity once you start to dig into it. And I guess you and I, our crossover together is like, improving, we're both keen to help executives improve decisions. And we're obsessed with the mix of who's in the room, using science to do that. What do you come at when you look at poor decisions in organizations? Where do you start? And I mean, you and I have spoken about biases and all sorts of things before, but how do you think people can genuinely improve decisions in an organization?
So I think that it's a bit like Alcoholics Anonymous. The first step is acknowledging that you have a problem. Hi, I'm James and I made a terrible decision. This fiction that I've talked about, that we subscribe to in organizations, that people are rational, logical calculation machines, it is a fiction. And if we start by acknowledging and accepting that it's a fiction, that people don't naturally make objectively brilliant, unbiased decisions, there's a number of techniques in the way that we set up the decision-making process, in the way that we set up the environment in which people make decisions, that can make those decisions more effective. So, let's take an example. I know that when I was struggling with the sound, I saw somebody, Kush, I think, commented on HIPPOs, highest paid person's opinion. Now, this is a massive issue for getting good decisions. What often tends to happen is the most senior, most important person in the room states their opinion, and everybody hears that opinion and at best moderate their own perspective accordingly, but often will refuse to speak up, won't say anything, because that would involve going against the senior person. How do you mitigate that? Well, very simply, have the senior decision maker speak last. Actually, rather than discussion in a meeting, set it up so that a decision is made using an anonymous vote. Perhaps at the start of the meeting, have people anonymously vote, and various mechanisms you can use for this, but have people anonymously vote on the decision, and then have the conversation, then have the debate. Similarly, groupthink is a massive problem, and plenty of examples of this over the years, where essentially a group of people just gets more and more swayed towards a particular set of beliefs, a particular set of decisions, and are unable to see any alternative perspectives. So
I'm reluctant to talk over James again, but I feel like he has gone. And I know we talk a lot about our research at Wizer came from Juliet Burke's book, which Two Heads Are Better Than One. And we talk a lot about social bias, information bias, and capacity bias, which is what James is talking about. And you're back. I've got two of you again.
Lucky you.
I'll kick one of you. I'll kick the clone of you, and we can keep going. So we're talking about, I guess, biases.
Yeah. So how do you get honest individual perspectives? Well, one way is actually instead of having a meeting where 8 people attempt to share their opinions in a room, and the person with the biggest salary, or the person with the loudest voice, or just the most verbose person shares their opinion and others don't get to share, we'll have 8 individual conversations instead of having that. And again, there are pros and cons to each of these solutions. This is not me saying that any of these solutions on their own are a silver bullet. It's more that an awareness that none of these approaches are perfect might enable you to use a combination of them. Some others, we tend to have a massive optimism bias, and optimism bias is good, because without optimism bias, we wouldn't attempt most of the things that we attempt, and the human race would not have progressed in quite the same way. But so often in organizations, we make these wildly optimistic assessments of how easy things are going to be. And, technology implementations, I'm sure we all know people in our personal lives subject to this, when they've been building a house or renovating a house, and the project manager tells them that it's certainly going to be done in 6 months. Newsflash, it's never done in 6 months. Similarly, if someone tells you that your SAP implementation is going to be done in 9 months, it's not. It's never going to happen. But we have this inherent optimism bias a lot of the time. Well, one of the ways around that is something that is generally described as base rate comparison. So what is the base rate for this? What is the average length of time it takes for a house build, or a house refurb, or an SAP implementation? And there are different data sources out there, and you've got to take them with a pinch of salt, etc., etc. But if on average it takes 24 months to do something, what is it about your situation or your organization that makes you believe you'll be able to do it in 6? If the base rate is 2 years, maybe it'd be a good idea to start with 2 years as your kind of planning assumption.
We are optimistic, or maybe we think we're going to be lucky and be the ones that it's different for.
Apologies to anyone out there who I've re-traumatized by mentioning house building or house refurbing.
There would be,
or indeed SAP implementations.
Yeah, no, there would be a few out there. All right, well, we're coming to the end of our time now, James. So if you could wave a magic wand and make an organization stop doing one thing tomorrow, what would it be? E-learning?
I will just say broadly, silver bullet solutions. Silver bullet solutions. There are no silver bullets. This isn't Hollywood. Humans are complex. One of the stats I quote in the book is that, depending on who you read, the brain is estimated to, each human brain is estimated to have somewhere between 85 and 100 billion neurons.
Yeah.
And they are joined together in a very complex system of systems by something like 100 trillion synaptic connections. Mapping one human brain, it has been estimated, and there's some controversy about this, but it has been estimated that accurately mapping one human brain would require more hard drive space than exists on Earth. That's one human brain. An organization is a collection of those human brains. So imagining that any simple one-size-fits-all solution is going to achieve whatever you want it to achieve in an organization of 10 of those brains or 10,000 of those brains is hugely naive. So if we could start by acknowledging that humans are complex, organizations are complex, the world is complex, humans are social, emotional, tribal, storytelling animals rather than logical calculation machines. If we could start by accepting those facts, organizations would be much better than they are.
Yeah, but it's messy and there's no clear answer, is there? Kush and I seem to be in the same reading group. We should start our own book club, Kush. But she's saying, when you went off screen, I was talking about bias. I was taking over your biases, talking about social information and capacity bias for a quick second there before you came on. But yeah, leading with diversity and inclusion isn't easy when you're trying to work together. It's so true. Anyway, Kush and I will be in touch about our next book in our unofficial club that we seem to be reading all ex-Deloitte people's books at the moment. If you're ex-Deloitte and have a book you'd like Kush and I to read, leave it here. And also, James, you're doing a lot in AI as well. Is there anything you kind of wanted to touch on with that work that you're doing and what you're seeing? Is that helping the situation, or is it? I mean, I know I'm seeing a lot of orgs just adopting and not really know what problem solving is the biggest thing I'm seeing. What are you seeing out there?
So AI is absolutely in the silver bullet category at the moment. I'm going to start with a quick caveat that AI, and when people say AI at the moment, what they usually mean is large language models. Large language models are very powerful, and they are potentially very useful in a lot of use cases. They are not the silver bullet solution, nor, by the way, are they conscious or even intelligent. They're very sophisticated next token, essentially next syllable predictors. But at the moment, because of the hype and the vast trillions of dollars that are being spent on this by the AI companies who are desperately trying to find a way of turning a profit, most organizations are treating AI as a solution looking for a problem. And many organizations have taken the approach of rolling out ChatGPT or Copilot or whichever one of the handful of platforms it is, and giving people a half-hour prompt training and hoping that magic will ensue. Magic will not ensue. The right approach for this is to put AI last. So at the moment, we're going with AI first. Putting AI last is the right thing to do. What is the business problem that we are trying to solve? What is the highest value? What is the biggest problem that we have in our business? What are some of the potential solutions to that problem? Is better technology part of the solution? Is AI or large language models one of the technologies that might be part of that solution? That's the right set of questions, loosely, to be asking. And one of the ways that large language models are being used currently, one of the most popular use cases, people are using them to create content, whether that's emails, social media posts, or they're using them to summarize meetings. This is very dangerous because if you ask most people in most organizations, the one thing they don't have a shortage of is meetings or emails. A Microsoft study last year, which Microsoft published in about June, it was based on vast amounts of data from their enterprise users across the globe, found that the average person receives 127 emails a day and 153 Microsoft Teams messages a day, and is interrupted by a Microsoft product once every 2 minutes. That's the world largely before everyone had AI. That's the world before we essentially made it free and instantaneous to write emails. Often what organizations are trying to automate with AI doesn't need automating, it needs stopping. So actually, one of the questions that needs to be asked is, do we need to do this at all? Because if we value it so little that we're just going to let an AI automate it, if this email is so unimportant that I'm just going to let my AI write it, do we need to do it? Because, to finish, I fear we are creating a world where my AI is going to write an email which I send to you, Kylee, and your AI then summarizes. And what was the point of any of it?
My AI is going to reply, but well, isn't it? There's something about 60% of comments on the internet are now bots. So people are raging at bots, not one another. It's all, yes, one AI to another. And I guess more is more. Maybe that's the message of it all. More is just more, people. So don't always need to do it. But James, this has been great. And I do recommend people pick up the book. It's online. I even have a little, there we are, books everywhere. It's on Amazon, and James also has it on his website. But it's a great, there's so many stories in there. It's wild, and so much history that you've put in there as well. So thank you for, everyone that's watching. The book is funny. It's a bit horrifying, yet weirdly hopeful. James, you do give us hope. And thank you for joining us and for tuning in. And yeah, drop comment drop us some comments, or if you want an introduction to James, he is easily found on LinkedIn. Is there anywhere else, James, you want people to find you?
No, you can find me on LinkedIn, and you'll find links to the book, to the Behaviour Boutique, and to my podcast, The B Word. I haven't recorded a new episode in a while, but there's about 20 episodes out there of me talking to academics and practitioners from across the world of social and behavioural science.
Fantastic.
Well, please get in touch. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thanks for everybody for helping us with the glitches and keeping chatting. We appreciate you guys. All right. Thanks for that, everybody. Till next time.